So you're thinking about becoming a rail project engineer. Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot to unpack there. Luckily, we've got a ton of research to dig into. We'll figure out what these engineers do every day, what it takes to succeed, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and we can even look at some of the bigger forces shaping the field, like sustainability. Everyone's talking about that these days, right? Or how about the role of technology? Always changing.
It's amazing how much tech is involved in everything these days. This RoleCatcher guide you sent over really highlights that. Plus, it dives deep into, the daily life of a rail project engineer.
One thing that struck me was it doesn't sound like you'd be stuck behind a desk all day.
It doesn't, does it?
No. It sounds like you'd be out in the field, managing projects, making sure things are safe. That's a lot of responsibility.
It is a big responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of responsibility, have you seen the qualifications they list? You'd need to know your engineering principles, building codes, even physics, it says. Physics. Okay, now that's not something I'd have thought of right away, I'll admit. But I guess when you're talking trains, tracks, speed. Yeah, it makes sense.
Right. Imagine designing a high-speed rail line. You've got to calculate how the track curves, how the weight's distributed on the train, all to make sure it's safe at those speeds. That's physics at work, no doubt about it.
That's a really good point. Especially with everyone wanting trains to be faster, more efficient. You need to understand that stuff inside and out.
Exactly. And it's not just about going fast. This guide also talks about the environment, right? And safety practices. It seems like those are huge in railway projects, especially as that whole sustainability thing gets more important.
Yeah, the sustainability angle definitely caught my eye, too. It's one thing to talk about it in general, but seeing how it impacts something as specific as rail engineering, that's really cool.
It really is. It's not enough to just, get the train from point A to point B anymore. You have to do it in a way that doesn't mess up the planet, which, by the way, is where things like LED certification come in. That's leadership in energy and environmental design.
Oh, right, LED, yeah.
It can be a big plus for these engineers. So, you see, it's a career that's both technical and, environmentally aware.
That's so interesting. I also noticed that having an eye for design is a big plus.
For sure. Think about rail bridges, for instance. You're talking load capacity, how strong the materials are, even the environment around the bridge. It's not as simple as just, drawing a line on paper.
Not at all. You have to bring all those different pieces together, and it has to be safe on top of everything else. Speaking of which, I did see that the guide stresses how important it is to never stop learning in this field. What you know on day one isn't going to be enough.
Yeah, 100%. Technology's always changing. There are new safety rules popping up all the time. You've got to keep learning if you want to stay ahead of the game.
So how do you actually get started in this field? I mean, besides all the learning, how do you even land a job as a rail project engineer? Besides all that learning we were just talking about.
Right. Besides all that. Well, remember that RoleCatcher platform we mentioned? It seems like they really focus on that job hunting part.
Yeah, they seem to have a ton of resources.
They do. One thing that stood out to me was their interview question database. It's huge, over 120,000 questions, all specific to rail project engineering.
120,000? Wow, that's a lot.
Right. It's a little intimidating, honestly. But it shows you how much they expect you to know.
It's not just tell me about yourself, huh?
No, not even close. These are super specific questions. I saw one about dealing with cost overruns, but you had to do it without compromising safety. It's getting into the weeds,
That's intense.
It is. And it makes sense. When you think about it, more and more companies are using those applicant tracking systems now.
The AI stuff.
Exactly. Which means your resume, your answers in interviews, they need to have the right buzzwords. Otherwise, a computer just tosses you out.
It's like you have to speak robot to get a job these days.
Kinda, yeah. And the crazy thing is, RoleCatcher has this AI that analyzes your practice interviews.
No way.
It's wild. It gives you feedback on everything, your body language, what you're saying. It's like having your own personal coach.
That is seriously cool. Okay, so let's say you nail the interview, you get the job. What are you actually doing day to day?
Well, based on this guide, it's definitely a mix of things. Some days you might be in the office looking at blueprints, maybe running some simulations on the computer.
Right.
But then other days you're on site at the actual construction site.
Makes sense.
Making sure everyone's following safety rules, that kind of thing.
It sounds like a pretty good balance between using your brain and actually getting your hands dirty.
It does. And I bet that variety keeps things interesting. I mean, you'd really need to have a lot of different skills to be a good rail project engineer.
Definitely. You have to know all the technical stuff, but you also have to be a good communicator, a good leader.
Exactly. You're working with a team after all.
So you're going back and forth, office to field, solving crazy complicated problems, managing people. Sounds like you'd never be bored, that's for sure. But what about like the long game? What does a career path look like for a rail project engineer? Where can it take you?
Now you're asking the really interesting questions. So this guide, it talks about how as you get more experience, you could move up to, say, a senior rail project engineer role, or even become a project manager.
Oh, wow. Managing entire projects. That's huge.
It is big. And some people, they take their expertise and specialize, like focusing on safety or maybe the environmental side or even quality assurance.
Yeah, it seems like those specialized skills would be super valuable, especially with everyone talking about sustainable infrastructure and all that.
Totally. Think about it. Cities are growing. Everyone wants greener transportation. Who's going to design and build those solutions? Rail project engineers, that's who.
That's amazing. You could literally shape how people move around in the future.
Yeah.
It's way more than just tracks and trains, isn't it? It's about communities, helping the economy, and doing it all in a way that doesn't wreck the planet.
It's a career with some serious purpose, you know? And yeah, the guide makes it clear. It's tough work, but it can be incredibly rewarding, both personally and professionally.
So we've covered a ton in this deep dive. We talked about what it's really like to be a rail project engineer day to day, the kinds of skills you need.
Right.
And we even looked at some of the bigger picture stuff, like how technology and sustainability are changing the whole field.
Exactly. It's this fascinating mix of technical know-how and like being aware of the environment. Plus, you've always got to be learning, always adapting.
So if you're out there listening to this and you love engineering, you love a good challenge, and you really want to make a difference in the world,
This could be it.
It could be the career for you. But ultimately, you're the one who has to decide. Right. Does this path match your own ambitions? What kind of mark do you want to leave on the world? That's what it all comes down to.